My name is Jennifer Romig. I'm a professor here at Emory Law School, and I'm here with my friend and colleague, Jen Mathews, also a professor here. We are here today to talk about IRAC. It's a famous acronym in legal analysis and legal writing. It stands for Issue, Rule, Application, Conclusion. Now, the acronym itself is really not the point. The point is what it does, what it's for, and that's what we want to talk about today. That's my first question. What is this IRAC acronym really for? What's its purpose?
Absolutely. So IRAC has a little bit of mystique behind it, but the main goal is just to provide a kind of structure for writing legal analysis, for written legal analysis. And one thing that IRAC does is organize written legal analysis around individual sub-issues of a legal rule. So break a rule into parts and look at each sub-issue separately. And the second thing that IRAC does is organize the written analysis by starting with a kind of explanation of the law or some background information about the law and how the law works, and then turning to application of the law to the facts of your case. So those two things are really key features of the IRAC structure. And because they're so familiar to legal readers, they make legal writing easy to read and kind of just familiar and predictable.
That's what I like about it, is that IRAC lets you talk about one thing at a time, and within each thing you have a good structure for explaining that thing and then applying that to the relevant facts for that particular module or unit.
It's very methodical, very structured. In fact, a lot of times I think of IRAC as a kind of building block.
Yes.
So we're going to take each issue and create an IRAC block and then stack those blocks together to make the complete legal analysis.
Yes. So where would one find IRAC out in the world of legal information and legal documents? Where do you see it?
Yes, a lot of places. So the first place, maybe primary place, is in judicial opinion. So in any sort of case or decision written by a judge, you'll often find that it follows IRAC format. So the judge itself, in writing the opinion, is going to break the rule down into parts, discuss each part individually, and give some background information about that part of the rule, and then apply it to the facts of the dispute that's before the court. So you're going to see it a lot in judicial opinions. Maybe not in the older cases, which tend to be a little bit more rambly, but definitely in many, many cases. Legal professionals also use IRAC structure in documents submitted to courts, so a legal brief or motion papers, you'll often see IRAC used.
That's persuasive writing?
Yes, persuasive writing, it definitely lends itself to IRAC. So even something like a letter that you might write from one party to another, to a demand letter to say, like, hey, you need to do certain conduct under this agreement, or you need to stop doing this certain conduct. That might follow IRAC format to be persuasive about the authority that's on that party side. And also in more objective legal writing. So documents that we call legal memoranda, which are a way of looking at a legal issue under a certain set of facts and predicting the way a court would rule. So not advocating for one side or another, but just predicting. So that kind of document would also follow IRAC format.
It's a really useful tool. Does it work everywhere, or would you say there are some places in the world of legal language where IRAC does not work?
One place that IRAC definitely just doesn't fit in is storytelling. So that might not seem completely relevant. We're not training fiction writers, but there's an awful lot of storytelling that goes on in legal writing. Anytime you are telling a story about your facts, writing a statement of facts in a document, or even just describing your facts for the opposing party or for the judge, you're really telling a story. And IRAC doesn't work for that. There's different techniques you can use to make that kind of writing effective, but IRAC isn't one of them. And another situation where IRAC isn't so effective is if you're just talking about the law in the abstract. So if somebody says, provide a summary of this legal issue in these 3 states, but there is no factual context, IRAC isn't going to work as well. Part of IRAC is the application of the law to the facts. So if you don't have facts, it's not going to work as well.
What would you say are the biggest challenges that people face in getting used to the IRAC model?
I mean, oftentimes legal writers will learn through the process of writing. So as they write about the legal issue, and this applies to other kinds of writing, not just legal writing, it's through the process of writing that you really understand, figure out what you want to say, how to say it effectively, and even kind of how to use authority effectively.
So you learn by writing.
Yes, you learn by writing, exactly. And so it's important to sort of go back to the beginning of your document and make sure the beginning of your document is reflecting where you ended up in your final thought process. So, and another challenge is IRAC is structured around first explaining the law, giving some information about how the law has worked in the past, and then applying the law to your facts. And it can be very hard to resist jumping ahead into the facts. Like, all of us want to get into the facts of our case. That's why we're writing the document. So, but it's important to resist that impulse, because the whole principle behind the IRAC model is that we're kind of looking at the law in the abstract to sort of understand how the law works on that particular sub-issue, and then applying it to the facts of your case, so that we can be kind of objective about the law before we get into the facts of our case. So it's important to resist that impulse, but all legal writers have to resist that, not just new legal writers.
What would you say as far as suggestions for new legal writers, sort of recognizing it, seeing it out in the world, and then trying to generate, their first IRAC organized document? What are your suggestions?
Right. So it's important to be able to recognize the use of IRAC. So as new legal writers and new legal readers are perusing different legal documents, a court case, a legal memorandum, a brief, whatever, you can make observations about how that writer is using IRAC. Look for how the writer has broken, it maybe started with some general rule, then broken that rule down into individual sub-issues, maybe even with subheadings, maybe not, and that for each of those sub-issues there's going to be a separate analysis, and that analysis is going to start with some explanation of the law, maybe some quotes from cases, maybe a little bit of historical background, maybe some examples from cases and how it's worked in other cases and the facts of those cases. And then the writer's going to shift to the facts that writer is analyzing. It's only then that they're going to get into the facts of the dispute or the case that they're dealing with. So really look for those two key features. And as a new legal reader or legal writer is perusing all these different documents, you can start getting a sense for how IRAC works and how to use it yourself. Also, you can see what happens when you don't use IRAC, right? So you're going to encounter some court case where the judge is overworked or sloppy, or maybe the case is from 1830 and that just wasn't the pattern back then. But you'll find some legal writing where you're like, wow, this is so hard to follow. I wish they would break it down into pieces and tell me what the law is before they're organize their writing in some way. So
that exact point, I think, can be scary. Like, oh, I need to write an IRAC, so I need to write it exactly this way, and then you can become sort of frozen of like, oh, I'm not sure what to write next. So I guess my suggestion would be to give yourself a little sort of freedom to actually just write, and maybe not worry so much about the structure at first, but then you have to leave time to edit and move things around so that your good ideas are shaped into this predictable, expected, common structure.
Right, that's a great point. Especially as you're getting familiar with IRAC structure and using it, it's not just going to flow out of you. You're not just going to say like, now I will write the I. So a stage where you're just getting ideas on paper, and then a stage where you're editing and rearranging and thinking about like, how would I best put this into IRAC structure, I think can be super effective. So.
Well, Professor Mathews, thank you so much for your time. It's been fun talking about IRAC today.
Wonderful, anytime.